The Chicago Bears' miserable season has finally come to an end as they fall to the Minnesota Vikings 17-31, making their record 6-11 in what is reportedly supposed to be Matt Nagy's final season as Bears head coach. Whether or not it's Ryan Pace's last season as Bears general manager, we have to wait and see. As of this recording, no official news on the firing of Matt Nagy and what will happen to Ryan Pace, but we are joined on the Sports Cubicle. It is Devin Tingle, Paul Chivari, the marvelous one, Dan Marver, and myself, Mike Mercado. And Devin, Paul, and myself will talk about the Ryan Pace situation a little later on today, but this is the thing that we needed to tackle first on the show, and that is this Bear season in total. And we really need to hit on this when it comes to what is going on in the mind of the marvelous one, Dan Marver, because in my opinion, you saw the report from Brad Biggs of Ryan Pace supposedly failing upwards, going to get a promotion, and that Matt Nagy will be fired. I think this has been a failure on all accounts, on scouting, on signing, on drafting, on coaching, on being able to adjust on the fly, on game planning. Marvelous one, what have you seen in this tenure, these 7 years of Ryan Pace as GM and these last few years of Matt Nagy from the double doink game to where we're at to end this season in Minnesota?
I think you covered all the failures pretty well. In terms of the 4 years, I mean, the fact of the matter is that it seems as though the Kansas City offensive genius came in with a plan with players that don't fit the plan. That's my assessment. The scheme didn't work here. And honestly, I'm of the opinion that had not Dalton gotten hurt, Nagy would have liked to have played him for at least half the season because he fits more of the scheme that Nagy likes. So, I mean, ironically, that's the way it looks. But I mean, going forward, they need a different guy, a guy that can do more on the fly. I mean, for example, over the years, a team like New England adapts to the team they're playing almost every week in terms of a scheme defensively and offensively. I mean, you got to obviously have a great talent or people in the right positions. But they do have, between Smith on defense and, and on the offensive side, Fields and Montgomery and Mooney. I mean, there are players that are definitely cornerstones for the franchise. So on the one hand, I think that they do have enough youth and talent that given the right scheme, again, I use the word, they can be successful, particularly in this division where they can be second best usually. maybe like last year with this 7 teams again, squeeze into the playoffs. I mean, it's exciting. I mean, actually, I was watching NFL Red Zone to see the thrills in the AFC, the ups and the downs of the last day of the season, where you had, Baltimore playing Pittsburgh, Indianapolis somehow losing to Jacksonville, which opened the door for Pittsburgh or Baltimore. So they played an overtime game, which is, basically winner take all to get into the playoffs. Those kinds of things are exciting. I mean, the Bears game was meaningless. It's sad that they'd have a meaningless game here in the middle of January, but that's what it is. What it is. Going forward, there are some optimistic signs given the right formula. In terms of the Pace era, you've covered it all. For whatever reason, I don't think if he's going to be kicked upstairs, that's fine. But they need somebody that can make better decisions in that position. And I'd like to see, again, an offensive guy. I think their defense doesn't need a lot of fine tuning. It's the offense that does mostly. I think that's where Nagy failed. Like I say, he tried to put a square peg in a round hole.
And you know what, Marver, you and I have been talking about this for a long time, and it's something that's really frustrating about the Matt Nagy era is refusing to make any type of adjustments. And this is something that you and I specifically, over so many different post-game shows, we've mentioned this. We've mentioned Bill Belichick a lot, and we've always talked about talent helps, having Tom Brady helps. But a lot of coaches like to mimic a Bill Belichick, but they don't mimic the thing that makes Bill Belichick what he is. And you hit it right on the head. And that is the way he adjusts his offense and his defense to every single week, to what's working in the moment. there is no pride in his offensive scheme, his defensive scheme, his playbook. It's what's going to win that down. And so many coaches want to steal the press conference, the post game, Bill Belichick. Well, that's all a facade. That's not the real coach. The coach is like what you mentioned, where you're able to, on one game, throw the ball 4 different times and you win it because you just ran it down the throat of the Buffalo Bills. And it is going to be fun to see what a roster of Khalil Herbert and David Montgomery, a Darnell Mooney, a Justin Fields. We'll see if Tevin Jenkins is able to develop. We know he has the heart. Are they going to put him in a proper position to play? What about Larry Borum? Like you said it, there are places on this team with Roquan Smith. It's the NFL. There should be enough of a quick turnaround. But now we got to talk about, philosophically speaking, about this team, how the philosophy of the McCaskies and Ted Phillips. Do you think that if Ryan Pace, like you said, is kicked to another position, he's head of scouting, and he gets to go to dinner with the McCaskies, and he's going to celebrate the 99th birthday with Virginia, what do you trust that if it's George and Ted making the decisions, that they're going to find the right person to make football decisions?
Probably not, because history is a great teacher of what's going to happen in the future. Unfortunately, the way it's structured, the Bears, they are almost set up for failure in a way, because they don't have the football savvy in the upper management. And I don't know if they can create a position, if the McCaskey would be willing to, some kind of a position higher up, even, I don't know. I mean, they talked about putting somebody in there like maybe Peyton's brother or somebody. I mean, I don't know who it would be, but somebody that would be higher up in the organization that would not necessarily, doesn't have to be a family member, but somebody that with a big Bears name that could be a buffer between the McCaskies and the football operation, because it's not working. I mean, basically, it hasn't worked for years. They did get to the, Super Bowl, obviously, back with the Super Bowl shuffle, and then one time later. But that's the goal, to get to the Super Bowl, obviously. And do they have the talent to do it? Not right now. Do they have the structure to do it? Absolutely not. So, I'm not wise enough to say exactly what the structure should be, but I think that there needs to be not only a general manager, but like a Phillips job, but somebody that really knows football. Let's put it that way, in that position, that can really direct the operation a lot better than it's been directed thus far.
And Marver, we hear about a legend like Olin Kreutz, and he went on his radio hit over on 670 The Score, a local station here in Chicago. And we hear him say that he was offered $15 an hour to help the offensive line by the McCaskies, by ownership, by the front office. And that is a center who's going to go to the Hall of Fame, one of the greatest Bears of all time, and that goes to show just how great Olin Kreutz was, but how starved this franchise is, that we know as an offensive top tier player was our center for all the years. But this is a guy that knows football, that loves football, that is ingrained in the organization, and you spit in his face. And this is something that just seems to be around the league. You hear Lance Briggs and Alex Brown and all these other former players, Matt Forte, talk about how they're treated and how it's so insular over at the fine family of the McCaskies. And for a charter franchise to treat their players like that, to not want to be part of a community with their players to get better, if you're talking about them always, trying to collaborate, that's the word of that franchise, right? Collaborate. It's always with the same people, and it's always the same results. And then you hear this story. As a Bears fan, why should any Bears fan listening to us here on the Sports Cubicle with Dan Marver, Devin Tingle, Paul Chivari, myself, Mike Mercado, as we put the Bears season to rest, they lose to the Minnesota Vikings 17-31. Dropping their record to 6-11. There's nothing more Chicago Bears than an 18-game season finishing 6-11. Marver, is there anything that a Bears fan on the front office, we talked about all the talent on the field, knowing how quick the NFL can turn around, should Bears fans be excited about next year? I mean, do you think that they're really in the running for a Jim Harbaugh? Do you think we could get a dream scenario of Harbaugh and Vic Fangio back together in Chicago? Should Bears fans be excited?
Well, I mean, sure, Vic Fangio is just like going Denver, so he'd be glad to come here. On the other hand, we're talking about New England. How about a Josh McDaniel? That we may as well, if we like the New England model, let's go New England. So, but well, probably, honestly, you might end up with another Nagy type like Peterson. I wouldn't be shocked with that either. But it's hard. I think that just a breath of fresh air is what's needed. And it's funny in the press conference today. He was talking about collaboration, and within the building, there's everything outside the building. They don't listen to that noise. They're all together. So it's a collaboration was a theme of his almost every press conference, and it's just unfortunate. He seems like a nice enough guy, but unfortunately, nice guys finish last.
We've talked about it here on the Sports Cubicle. A lot of this is in context of on the field, coaching, scouting, things like that. We've always heard good things about Matt Nagy as the man. And we were some of the first people here locally in Chicago. And of course, all the other reputable stations who, have some self-respect talking about, that there should not have been fans chanting fire Nagy at his son's football game. We understand the differences and how to criticize someone. Matt Nagy failed as a head coach of the Chicago Bears, whether it was because he didn't have the players to fit his scheme or he couldn't fit his scheme around his players. We also could say the same thing about Ryan Pace, that they have not been able to put a good football team together that has been able to mature. And they keep talking about culture. This is a team that was doing dumb penalties, that would have wide receivers fall on the ground and they wouldn't touch him. We've seen a lot of bad football. So you do need a different culture change. So I guess, Marvelous, let's say it this way. If you're the McCaskies, or do you believe the McCaskies will, if they do put Ryan Pace in a different position and he's only now part of family photos and Matt Nagy is released and he'll do something else in his football career, do you think that they're going to spend the money and get an established, respectable head coach that commands the room that's going to have a lot of input on this roster? Or do you think they're going to go for a high-end, high-ceiling, a lot of potential head coach?
You probably won't want somebody with too much input, in my view. But we're going to talk about them later. But look at the Bulls as a model. They had the Foreman Pax era, and it seems like they transitioned to a successful management team in the last year or two. So as a model for that, I mean, what do they need? They need maybe a successful general manager and assistant general manager that's been somewhere else, such as the Bulls obtained. So I think that's the formula. Maybe that's the recipe to look at what the Bulls did, because after all, I mean, they have the best record in the NBA right now, so they're doing something right. At 26-10, so that's something I'd like to see the Bears do. Just have a somebody that's got some kind of a track record as a successful general manager, somebody or assistant, somebody that's been not has to be a coach, could be an assistant, offensive coordinator particularly. And there are a lot of names out there for these positions. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who would be interested. And just a whole fresh approach, general manager, maybe even president and a coach would just be a breath of fresh air, and we could move forward and have some optimism for 2022 with the players that we have that are a good nucleus for the team. And unfortunately, they don't have a first-round draft pick this year. I believe they don't have a fourth-round draft pick, so it's not going to happen that way. And they don't have a lot of money in the salary cap, I believe. So they are limited with what they can do. I just think it's going to take some time. I mean, it's funny how Nagy was talking about today, how they're just on the cusp of being great, more or less. And he said it a little differently, but that it takes 3 or 4 years to develop. But I just don't see it with this group.
Well, we want to know from all the wonderful listeners, what do you think about this Bears season? Was it a disappointment? Let us know on Twitter at Sports Cubicle TV.